Welcome to the On Purpose podcast, where together we will learn from personal stories and explore thought-provoking topics, all with one goal in mind: living a more purposeful life. What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 198. I'm excited to be here with you guys again, as always, and I want to thank our community members that are continuing to join us on Patreon and signing up for our membership options. Your financial support is what allows us to continue to grow and to try and reach our goal of being the most impactful podcast in the world. I've also came up with a new little catchphrase that I'd love for you guys to let me know what you think about it, and it's building on the title of my book. And so now I want to start saying the On Purpose podcast is where the stories of extraordinary people hiding in ordinary places come to be told. I like that because we're not after blue check marks. You don't have to be a celebrity to be of value to our community or have a place in our community. You just got to want to show up. You got to want to show up and share your story. You got to want to show up and learn and to hear something that may be different than what you thought and be open to it. So if that's resonating with you community members, please get over to Patreon, the On Purpose podcast, and subscribe and help us continue to grow. It's kind of your way of paying your bill for the podcast information. It shows up weekly for the last 4 years. You can like, subscribe, share, and join us on Patreon. All right, team, this week I'm excited for the interview. This is a man I've been following for a couple years on social media, watching what he's doing. I really appreciate the truth and rawness with which he shares his story and his battle with PTSD and depression, and quite honestly almost taking his own life and considering it and coming out on the backside, and after admitting he needed help, getting the help, and now he's written a great book about it. He's out on the speaking tour sharing it, so that we can impact each other's lives and realize we don't have to be good every day, and that when we're not good, there are things we can do to make ourselves better. So I hope this week you enjoy our interview with retired law enforcement officer and the author of Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma, Michael Sugrue. Enjoy the interview. Mike, welcome to the show, my friend. It's an honor to finally get you on the show. I've been watching your stuff for a while now, and I am excited to be able to share your story with our community.
I'm stoked, brother. I mean, you're straight OG when it comes to podcasts. So to be on your show, it's an honor. So thanks for having me.
You know, it's funny, man, is now OG. Now all I focus on is old. I'm like, dang, I am getting old around here.
Hey, that's why I had to just shave my beard. I was looking like Santa Claus. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, no, I got to keep those in. That just lets my kids get a visual representation of what their teenage years were like for me.
Exactly.
Well, Mike, do me a favor. Give the On Purpose community a brief bio of a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I actually come from a law enforcement family, and I wanted to be a cop since I was literally 8 years old. I mean, literally, my whole life has been planned out for this profession. Part of my plan was to go in the FBI, which is initially why I went to college. I got my degree, but I had a full scholarship through the Air Force for the ROTC program. Studied criminal justice, graduated in '98, and then I went into the Air Force as a butter bar, second lieutenant,
Okay.
in security forces,
Yeah.
which, for people that don't know, it's just basically law enforcement, air-based ground defense, anti-terrorism, force protection, nuclear security, all that kind of cool stuff. And I was literally serving all over the world. I was in the Middle East, South America, Europe, all over the US. And I got out in '04 as a captain, honorably, of course. And I went straight into civilian law enforcement back here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I got picked up by the Walnut Creek Police Department. Served in a few different roles, from field training officer to in-house SIU detective. I was undercover 2 years on a California state drug task force, eventually promoted to sergeant, where I ran teams on the street. And then I was also a driver instructor and a PIO as additional duties. I medically retired back in 2018 for what I like to call post-traumatic stress injury versus disorder.
Sure.
And that literally led me on the path that I'm on here today. After several years of healing, coming from a very dark place, now I get out there and I speak all across the country to military, to law enforcement agencies, to first responders. And just recently, back in April, I released my first book, Relentless Courage, with my co-author, Dr. Shauna Springer.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah, and that's where I picked up your journey probably a couple years back as you were working through the book process and you shared it on LinkedIn. I really enjoyed just the honesty of your posts and your willingness to share your story, and not the highlights of your story, but the actual realness of the struggles that you faced.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I was embarrassed and ashamed for years. I mean, that's why literally I suffered in silence, because I thought that asking for help, admitting that I had issues that I needed to deal with, was weakness. And now I know that's the furthest from the truth. I know that asking for help, I mean, it saved my life definitively, but that was the most courageous, the bravest thing I've ever done. It was nothing in the military, it was nothing on the streets in law enforcement, but it was raising my hand and asking for that help.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, absolutely. And for our non-law enforcement members of the community, this resonates across all spectrums of life. It's all about what I want to call embracing your mental wellness, and embracing those days where you don't feel good, but you got to move forward. And how do I do it? And how do I talk to somebody? And what do I recognize? But now, Mike, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to test your bravery a little bit more right here, my friend, because
Let's do it.
I got to warm you up, dude. I can't have, this is like a high level fitness, mental gymnastics game here. I can't just have you going in cold. So
Hey, let's do it. I'm ready.
I got to know, man. Our community wants to know, Mike. You are trapped on a deserted island and you get one food for the rest of your life. What are you going to be eating?
Oh, that's easy. It's going to be Zachary Chicago style pizza from here in the Bay Area. I mean, I'll eat that every single day.
Chicago style. You like all that dough, huh?
Hey, you know what? I mean, not all chains, but this one place, Zachary's, I've been going there since high school, since 1989, and it's like crack. I mean, when it comes to pizza, it's pizza crack.
All right. Now here's the true test. Do they know your order as soon as they see you?
Oh man, everywhere I go, they know my order, because unfortunately, I like to modify things and add things and take away things. So I'm that annoying guy that comes in and they're like, "Oh man, he's back." So yeah,
You're that
they
guy.
know it. Trust me, I am that guy.
That's awesome. All right. You get one superpower. You can have a traditional power and make one up yourself. What would your superpower be and why would you want it?
Oh, see, now this is a tough one. I wasn't ready for this question right here.
I told you I'm testing your bravery. Like you're just going and jumping in cold here.
Hmm. You know what? I think I'd like to fly, honestly, because there's just something about like seeing birds, out there just in the sky, just kind of floating along the wind and checking everything out, taking everything in. And to me, it's seeing things from a different perspective, from a different level, just that feeling of freedom and serenity and calmness.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. What is a favorite book or your go-to book that you've read repeatedly?
Well, I'd like to say my own book, of course,
Oh,
Relentless
for sure.
Courage. But but actually, The Body Keeps the Score is a phenomenal book. And I actually heard it on Audible for the first time and I've read it. And every time I read that book, I get something new from it. I get a new nugget from it. And that book just really breaks it down for not first responders, but just anybody in the world. And it explains, the physical outcomes when we deal with stress and what it does to our body and what it does to our health. And so, just very, very
Wow,
interesting book.
awesome. All right, you get to have dinner with one person. They can have either passed or still be with us in the world. Who do you want to have dinner with, and what are you going to ask them?
This is easy. So, Jake Gyllenhaal, and I have to explain this one because it's not a man crush or nothing like that. I got a girlfriend and whatnot. But my favorite movie of all time is End of Watch. I mean, literally, I've seen that movie probably 35 times. And just last week, I watched Jarhead, and every single movie
Oh
that
yeah.
guy makes, I mean, it's phenomenal. Even that one he did about being a dispatcher that came out last year. And so I actually hope that someday my book gets turned into a film, and I hope that he stars in it. So I'm going to have dinner with Jake, and we're going to talk about the screenplay for Relentless Courage.
I love it, man. That's good. Yeah, yeah. You gotta dream big. You gotta shoot for the stars with that one. I like it. And honestly, I could see him playing you. I think that would fit well.
Well, I'll be honest with you, you do have to shoot for the stars because I'm going to use just a little example. Like on our book, Relentless Courage, a Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who is a legend. I mean, this
Yeah.
guy has been in the business for, 20 plus years. I've heard him speak in public. He wrote the foreword for our book, and he didn't know who I was. And I literally, when it came to it, I reached for the stars on that one, and it happened. So, never give up your dreams and always shoot for the stars.
And so I'll share with you my big reach right now is my wife might say it's a man crush, but I think the two of us would have a good time on this podcast is McConaughey. I've been pushing. I'm either gonna get him on my show or I'm gonna get a restraining order because I message him at least once a week about coming on the show.
All right. Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, his best movie, I think, is Lincoln Lawyer. That
So
movie,
good.
oh my gosh, I've seen that at least 10 times. So, hey, I'm gonna tell you right, if you got him on the show, I want to be there when you guys are recording. So,
Yeah, no, I think it'd be fun. So, well, Mike, I appreciate you being here, man. Like I tell everybody, being entrusted to share their story is one of the greatest honors I have in my life, and it's truly an honor to have you on here today to share with our community your story.
you know what? These are things that I didn't even want to talk about for years. And what I found out through my journey is that I'm not special and I'm not unique, and nothing I've been through is. I'm just willing to talk about it. And the thing is, by talking about it, it lets other people know that they're not alone, that,
Yeah.
there's not something wrong with them, that they're actually normal and their feelings when being exposed to this kind of trauma year after year, it's normal. And we just got to talk about it.
So talk to me about what was your low point? When did you realize, okay, I need to reach out and talk to us? Kind of talk to us briefly about what got you there and what was that moment where you're like, okay, this has to be the bottom.
So the moment it first started, it was kind of like a big chain of events, but I was a brand new patrol sergeant. I'd just been promoted. The shift started the night after Christmas back in 2012. Was a few hours from going off duty, and basically a call comes out with a woman barricaded inside a condominium, and there was a guy armed with a knife, and it ended up being a officer involved shooting where unfortunately I had to take someone's life, a
Sure.
man that was not only trying to kill a couple but tried to kill myself and my fellow officers. And that incident, for me was kind of a tipping point because up to that point I had been exposed to just lots of trauma like all first responders have. And I
Right.
never talked about it, I never addressed it. And this particular incident, for a lot of reasons I'm not going to go into full detail here, but I go into
Sure.
about the book, was that it was very unusual. And I was sued. I went through a 4-year lawsuit. I ended up in civil federal court in San Francisco in 2016. And when that ended, and we prevailed, thank God, but when that ended, I thought everything was going to get magically better. But during that whole time, I lost my marriage. I started having major health problems. I started having issues at work. I mean, you name it, like everything was falling down on me. And I got to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. I literally wanted to die in the line of duty. I started putting my officer safety, my tactics aside, and
Wow.
purposely putting myself in dangerous situations, hoping that bad guy killed me, that took me out on the street.
Do you remember
And it
having
was this
conscious
very,
thought about that?
absolutely. I mean, I remember some specific incidents where, I mean, like I was on a traffic stop on an interstate and there was this car zooming by. And I literally thought for a second, what if I just step back into traffic right now? Nobody's going to know. They're going to think it's just some accident. But my daughter's going to be taken care of for life. She's never going to forget who her father was.
Yeah.
I'm going to be memorialized. All these just things that were going through my head. And Basically, in November 2016, about a week after Thanksgiving, I was working day shift patrol sergeant, getting ready to go home. Call comes out of a suicide in progress. And it turns out it's my best friend. His name is John Davison. And I talk about him in the book. He actually has his own chapter, but he's a Vietnam veteran. He was a 35-year reserve officer. He ended up slicing both wrists, stabbed himself in the torso multiple
Oh,
times,
wow.
OD'd on multiple prescription medications. And I just got to the trauma center when the ambulance brought him in. He was covered in blood, just in and out of consciousness. And I thought for sure he was going to die. And I remember sitting there in the hospital for hours waiting for him to come out of surgery. And all I could think about was my daughter. And how is she going to feel when I'm not here? And is she going to blame herself like I was blaming myself for my friend John? And it was a month after that, on the anniversary of my shooting, 2016, is when I finally got the strength and courage to ask for that help.
What, yeah, that's powerful. So that was your best friend that you ended up seeing in the hospital that caused you to reflect on, wait a second, what am I going to leave for my loved ones?
Well, I remember sitting there, and his sister, who I hadn't met, she drove up hours and she was at the hospital. And I just had this overwhelming sense of guilt as to why I didn't see the signs that he was suffering so bad. That why
Sure.
didn't I do something from stopping him from trying to kill himself? Sitting there not thinking he was going to survive. And it was that guilt that all I could think about was my daughter. And is she going to have those same feelings and that same guilt? And how is it going to affect not only her, but future generations if she has children? And that was what pulled me out of the darkness.
And what was your first step then? So you have that revelation. Oh my gosh, what am I thinking? What am I contemplating? Did you go to a friend first? Who did you talk to first?
So the day was December 26, 2016, and I didn't have my daughter because I'd gone through my divorce and we had alternating schedules. I was by myself. I'd gone to the gym like I do every day, which really tries to help me get out of my funk, get me out of my depression.
Yeah.
And it didn't work that day. And I remember leaving the gym, and I was in the parking lot, just sat there for 2 hours, just literally bawling, just literally felt like I was losing everything in my life. And literally, finally, I just pulled out my phone, I picked it up, and I called the on duty watch commander. And he was a fellow sergeant, but he was an acting lieutenant at the time. And he still works there today. He's a captain now, a phenomenal man. And he listened to me and we talked. And, I said, look, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need help. I need to make this a priority. And he immediately connected me with a department contracted therapist. And I talked to her literally, I mean, right after I got off the phone with him. And that started my recovery process.
And what do you think held you back from doing that earlier?
There's actually a few things. I think the first and foremost is the culture of being in the military, of being a first responder, especially a supervisor in law enforcement,
Yeah.
that asking for help is looked at as being weak. And I had this feeling that, people weren't going to trust me. People weren't going to follow me. I wasn't going to be able to lead people anymore, that it was going to end my career as I knew it. That was the first thing. But personally, I was going through this just really contentious divorce and fighting for custody of my daughter. And it hadn't been finalized at this point. It had almost been finalized, but I also had this overwhelming fear that my ex-wife would use that against me, that people would say, this guy's crazy. He can't be a suitable parent. He can't provide for his daughter and take care of his daughter. And that was my biggest fear, was losing my daughter and not having custody of her. I mean, that to this day, my daughter is the most important person in my entire life, and she always will be.
Sure. Gosh, that's amazing. Yeah, I never thought of that angle, that because you're going through a legal proceeding, having met your mental health status or asking for help being used against you, which is very possible. We've seen courts do all kinds of crazy things.
Well, not only that, to take that a step further, as I mentioned, I got put through 4 years of depositions that ended up in federal trial, in
Right.
San Francisco. And it would have also been used against me in federal court proceedings as well. So there was, in my mind, there was a clear domino effect that if I, revealed that I needed help, that all these series of negative things in consequences would then happen in my life.
And I think for our community members, a lot of what Mike is saying goes on daily in the lives of the first responders that are serving you. The balancing act of their own mental well-being with their sacrifice for the community, the standing up for the community. And a lot of times, Mike, I'd be curious if you agree, but in my opinion, a lot of times our own well-being and mental health comes third or fourth down the list.
No, you are absolutely correct. And here's the ironic thing. I mean, we go out there every single day. We go to domestic violence situations, disturbances, I mean, family issues, child abuse, and we're constantly giving advice to other people on how to manage their problems, on how to solve their issues. Yet we don't take any of this advice that we freely give out on a daily basis and apply it to our own lives, apply it to our own relationships, whether that's marriage or a significant other or children.
Yeah.
We freely give it out, but we don't do it ourselves. I mean, how ironic is that?
Well, and you know what I always get to, Mike, and I actually did a recording or an episode on this way back in the day called You Good. And how many times we interact with people and you say, hey, Mike, how you doing? You're like, good. And I'm like, man, I know he's not good. Like, that's not a real good answer. But I don't ever take time to say, Mike, what's going on? I don't take time to ask a question beyond just accepting that you're good. And
Well,
for me, I'll tell you in my life, many times when I told people I was good, I'm good. I really wanted them to ask me something more so I could talk about something.
and see, that's the culture, is that we don't really want to know how people are doing. When we ask people, if someone actually said, I'm not doing good, I'm in crisis, I think people would be shocked and take a step back because they're not ever expecting to hear that answer. And we're so conditioned to tell everybody that we're good because, we have this facade that we have to put up, not only to the public, but to our own
Yeah.
agency, to our fellow peers, that nothing bothers us, that we're invincible, we're brave, we're courageous, and we're going to go out there and we're always going to take charge and we're going to handle our business. And in fact, I actually had a supervisor one day who told me, he said, look, if the captain or chief ever comes down and asks you how you're doing, even if you're not, because he knew I had issues that were going on, he's like,
Sure.
don't tell him that. Just tell him that you're good. Tell him that you're fine. And if you want to talk about it, you can hit me up over coffee. We'll talk about it. But don't ever tell him that. I mean, literally, that's what we have going on across our agencies, not just across the United States, but all over the world.
Yeah. And it's a negative byproduct of what you and I talked about off the air, is that we have this idea that we would be weak by asking for help, that we'd be weak if we say we're not good. And I want to flip the script and offer the opposite. On the days you admit you're not good, when you actually go talk to somebody, you are in fact stronger than hiding it.
You are absolutely correct. And I didn't see that though. When I was in it,
No?
I didn't see it. I see it now because I've come out the other side of it, because I've put in a lot of hard work
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of setbacks and good days and bad days. But that is a fact. It is strength and courage. It isn't weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to change about our culture. We have to smash this stigma and flip it, reverse it.
Yeah, and not just in law enforcement or military or first responders, but I would say just in life in general. Like we have got to come to a point where the facade of always being right and the facade of always being good takes a backseat to actually wanting to find joy in life, wanting to live life and be happy, not just put on a cover where everybody thinks you have this highlight real life, but behind the scenes, you're really struggling.
Absolutely.
So you start counseling, you start talking to professionals. What was the first moment you had in that process where you're like, I'm on the right track. Like this is what was missing for me.
So I had a transition from that first therapist that I told you about. We had a department contracted therapist, and I eventually transitioned to another clinician who I had never met, but came recommended from a friend. And the very first meeting with her, she actually shared a very deep, dark personal story of something that happened in her life that literally just shocked me. I mean, I couldn't believe what this woman in front of me was telling me. And she actually, was fully open, but more importantly, she talked about her journey of many years and how she came out the other side of this. I mean, she was actually living proof of just basically experiencing something so horrific, something I could never imagine myself, even with all the trauma I had been exposed to. And here is this happy, knowledgeable, friendly woman in front of me who was literally living it. I mean, she was living proof. And it was at that moment I had this trust with her because I knew, based on what she told me, that I could trust her with anything in my life, that I could talk to her about anything and everything, and I wouldn't be judged, that she would listen and that she would understand it.
I love it. And that's the power of story, right? And that's the power of sharing the real story, is that others will identify their story within yours.
Exactly. And like I said, this woman wasn't a first responder. I mean, she worked with first responders as a therapist, but I immediately connected with her. I immediately knew that I could trust her. And trust is the key to this whole process because if people are going to open up, they need to know they can trust the person they're talking to, that it's not going to be used against them, that it's not going to get out to other people, that what is said is held in confidentiality and that it's protected.
Yeah, absolutely. You will never get somebody to open up a second time if you violate their trust the first time.
You're right. And you know what I've heard so many horror stories is that oftentimes, especially first responders, is they'll seek out through their EAP program, employee assistance program,
Yep.
and they'll just get sent to a random therapist, somebody who has never worked with first responders or military people, who doesn't know our culture, doesn't know our profession. And usually 99% of the time, they go in for that one session and they end up coming out worse than they were before and they never go back again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we almost re-victimize them.
Exactly. And then you're like, why am I even doing this? I
Yeah.
mean, I just saw this quote unquote therapist and she was traumatized by what I told her and in absolute shock. And I mean,
Yeah.
and you're sitting here now, you're traumatizing your therapist. It's like, why I really must be messed up then. I can't tell anybody this stuff.
No, sure. That's a good perspective. And I'm sure many people have felt. So you're working through the process, you're getting better. It's a process, right? It's not going to be over one night there. When did you decide that, man, I want to start sharing my story with the world to empower others? When did you come to that decision to maybe write a book about this?
Very, very long road. So I'll try to make a long story short. I first asked for help the end of December 2016. And I started this process. I was going to first responder support meetings. I was seeing a therapist. I went through a program called the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat, which was literally life changing, life saving. I tried medication. I was doing all these things, but then there was a series of events, which I call admin betrayal or institutional betrayal, which we could go into a whole nother episode about that. And I really go into depth about this in the book, but that led me to actually medically retire in 2018. And so at that point, I wasn't working, I wasn't doing anything, but I was going online on LinkedIn, a few other platforms, and I was posting things about post traumatic stress, suicide prevention, sharing things. And this guy hits me up. His name was Danny Bird. And I didn't know him. He didn't know me, but he ran a podcast. And this is in 2019. And he said, look, I run this fitness podcast. He was a former police officer a few hours south of me. And he's like, I'd love for you to share your story. And I'm like, I'm not interested. Like, I don't want to do a podcast. I don't want to do an interview. Like, I don't want to, share my story. And so the guy, he just kept harassing me. Thank God. I mean, literally, he kept bugging me. And finally, months later, he's like, look, dude, he's like, I will drive the 2.5 hours to you. You just name the spot. Okay. I'll bring all the stuff. I need an hour of your time. And that's it.
Love
And
it.
so he finally got me to commit. And I'm the kind of guy that if I commit, I don't back out. Like once I say I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. And so he drove up. I met him at this Mimi's Cafe. We're in the back. To this day, you can actually hear the kind of the restaurant music in the background faintly. And, he had this computer, two headphones, like a video camera. And I thought we were gonna have breakfast, have some coffee, get to know each other. He's like, "Look, dude," he's like, "I got to be out of here in an hour because I got to head back to San Jose, and so we got to just do this interview." And so I'm like, "Oh my god, dude, really? I'm starving." And so I put on these headphones, and we do it. He records it, audio, video.
Yep.
And a few weeks later, he posts it. And this was the pivotal moment because when he posted that interview, there's a couple things that happened. The first thing that happened was this huge burden came off my shoulders because I literally had been hiding my story. I hadn't shared it with anybody, my own personal story. In fact, most people that I worked with didn't really know why I retired. They didn't know what I went through. And so when I shared this, the good, the bad, the ugly, and it was out there, it was like I couldn't control it anymore. It was like this power, it's gone. It's out there, and people are either going to listen to it, they're going to judge me, or do whatever they're going to do. But the most powerful thing that happened was I started getting messages from all over the world. I mean, from the UK, from Canada, from all over the US, from people I didn't know who said, "Look, man, your story is my story. And thank you so much for sharing it." And then they started sharing their story with me. And that's when I knew that there was power in healing in sharing. And that's when I also knew that I'm not alone. I
Right.
mean, I have countless brothers and sisters out there who have experienced the same or very similar things.
Yeah. And that could be said for anybody in any walk of life, right? Like when you share your story is going to resonate with somebody at some point around the world.
It is. And that's the thing is like, so now, this book is out there. I actually hit up some guys that I work out with at my gym who I've always kind of seen and waved to, but we didn't know each other. But I knew these guys had no background in law enforcement. In fact, I knew a couple of them had some really bad experiences with law enforcement.
Yeah.
But I actually approached them and said, "Look, I know we don't know each other, we've seen each other, but let me tell you who I am." And I said, "I want you, if you're willing, to read this book. And then after you're done, I want to take you out for coffee or lunch and I want to talk about this." And that's where these men, they shared their very deep personal stories of things they experienced in childhood, things they experienced with very negative encounters with law enforcement. And it opened up that door of communication. And I really saw how similar we were as opposed to how dissimilar we are.
Yeah. You found the humanity in each other through story.
It's exactly right. And that's what this book is about, is it shows the humanity behind the badge and behind the uniform.
Yeah.
And it shows the people on the street who don't know what we do or why we do it, the real us that we don't want to show people, that we're scared to show people because we think it's weak.
Not only that, not only scared to show people, but I would even venture to say a lot of times we're scared to show ourselves. Right?
I agree with that.
We hide who we truly are from ourselves, and that's we could segue off here, but this is one of the big things I always I'm a big proponent of, is that law enforcement officers should have good retirement so they can work 20 years, given all they got to sacrifice to their communities, and then they should be forced to retire at 20 years and go do something else in life. Because life is way too short to just stay in that lens forever.
You're right. And so many first responders, and I'll say all first responders, firefighters, paramedics, police officers, it's their identity. Like
Yeah.
that's to themselves is all they have. That's what they're known for. And they place their priority on the job and working countless overtime. And I know we got to pay the bills and, we got to do what we got to do. But what's more important than that is our family, our loved ones, having other things outside the job, things to look forward to. And, now that I'm retired, I mean, and we were talking about this before we started recording, but what I do now is I literally try to live life to the fullest. I enjoy things that I never had time for when I was working. And I know so many people that never stop working. They retire and a week later, they're already in another job. And then they keep bouncing from job to job to job and they never stop working.
Right. No, I agree. And it's sometimes a sad cycle we work ourselves into. And I hope that like one of the big messages I hear in you is, slowing down and taking the time to be honest with your feelings and your emotions and not just pushing through it to get to something else. The further we push them down, just the more that's going to be there when it does explode for us or when it does erupt or come to the surface. So
Exactly.
by slowing down and tuning into ourselves a little bit more, we can actually be our whole self, right? And we can live
And that
life fully how we were meant to live it, not compartmentalized.
and that's that's the beautiful thing about it. I mean, I am now more present, and when I say present, I mean, of course, I mean physically, but I mean mentally and emotionally. And I'm a better father now than I ever was. I mean, I literally love, picking up my daughter from school, like going to her volleyball games and seeing her play. These are things that weren't a priority for me when I was working. But now it's like, no, this is really what I enjoy. I love doing this. Whereas before it's like, no, I got to work, I got to get the next promotion or the next assignment. And that was the priority.
So what advice would you have? What would you share for our listeners to help improve that mental well-being, the wholeness of their life? What would you recommend?
It comes down to communication. And this is a huge mistake that I made early on as a brand new law enforcement officer. I told myself that I would never bring the job home. I would never talk about it. I would keep work separate. That way I was protecting my family. And it was actually the worst thing I could have ever done. And what you need to do is open up that communication right now. When you come home pissed off in a bad mood, explain why. Like, talk about, you don't have to go into graphic detail, but simply say, look, here's what happened at work, and it's really bothering me, and I just need a little time to decompress. And please just, give me some time. We'll get back together here and we can talk about it. But you're opening up that communication, you're normalizing talking about your feelings and how things are affecting you instead of pretending like everything's all good, or like I was worried about how are they gonna judge you? Is your
Right.
family or friends gonna be scared? Are they gonna look down upon you? Are they gonna think you're weak? And it's like, no, they're gonna love you that much more, and you're gonna build a strong, healthy relationship. And
Right.
I didn't do that, and that's exactly why I lost my marriage because when I finally tried to open up those doors of communication, there was already way too much damage that had been done, and it was too late for me. But
Yeah.
for a lot of people listening to this, it's not too late for you. And you can start right now, today.
I love it. And here's what do you think on this, Mike? So we're talking about communication with the people around us and stuff, but what would you say about communication to yourself?
That's huge. I mean, you got to be honest with yourself. I
Yeah.
mean, you really do. And that goes along with self-care,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people look at self-care as being selfish, and it's not. You really truly have to make time for yourself, and you have to give yourself the time and the space what you need because that's only going to help in other aspects of your life. And like as an example for me is I like to go hiking. I like to be out in nature with nobody around, literally just taking it in, but also just thinking about things and thinking about, what's going on in my life, thinking about what I'm feeling and these types of things. Literally just slowing down
Yeah.
and taking a pause, taking time for
Yeah.
ourselves. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Disconnect a little bit. And one thing that drives me crazy, and I've talked about this on different episodes, is when people talk about the trend of selflessness and be selfless. And I'm always like, that to me is the dumbest word we've ever created, is you're literally telling me you want me to be less of me to benefit you. Well, how about this? How about I'm the best for you when I'm the best for me? And it starts with me being the best for me before I can be the best for anybody around me. Right? You think
You
about,
just hit it. You hit
yeah,
it on the head, brother.
it's ridiculous when I'm supposed to be less of me. And that drives me nuts. Yeah, absolutely. Self-care is selfish, but you want me to be selfish because for me to be the best for you, I need to be best for me. And it starts that way.
I could not agree more. Amen, brother.
So I love that you are sharing truths. And one of the truths that you share and that I share in my courses, and I has been statistically true every year of my law enforcement career since 1997, is that more law enforcement professionals take their own lives than are taken by bad guys.
Absolute fact.
And
You
you
know,
are publicly speaking about that. So talk to me about what the messages you're sharing and how we can change that trend, Mike.
the message that I'm sharing is that we spend countless hours, I mean, literally hundreds of hours in our career training on defensive tactics, on emergency driving, on firearms, on arrest and control techniques. These are all designed to protect us from the bad guy on the street, from the person that's going to take us out. But as you mentioned, statistically, we are much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of another. And that is a fact. The numbers are greatly underreported. Last year alone, I believe we had 155 or 156 suicides, and that number is going to go up. And since they've been tracking it since 2016, we've had over 1,100 reported suicides. And I would say that number is 2 to 3 times at least underreported. And so by sharing my story of how I almost became one of those suicide numbers, but I talk about how I came out of that darkness and that I'm living proof that you can come out the other side of post traumatic stress injury and that there's a whole new life on this other side. That's the message. And that's what resonates with people. Because, like I said, I'm not unique and I'm not special. I'm just willing to talk about it.
No, I love that, and it's funny you say that you're not unique and you are special because you are distinctly both of those, as we all are, and it isn't in our uniqueness that we serve the world, right? No two of us are the same. But if we don't ever lean into it and step into it and share that story, that the world can't benefit.
Absolutely.
Nah, dude, I love it, man. I love the passion with which you speak, and I love the courage you had to share your journey. And you're absolutely right. You are not alone, my friend.
It wasn't easy, but I'm so glad I did it, and I'm so glad I'm here today.
Yeah. What's been the biggest challenge you faced since you released the book, since you went public with everything that you had to tap back into your let me face this fear a little bit and continue to move forward?
It goes along with being vulnerable because in my book, I share so much. I mean, I literally bare my soul in that book, and it's not a lot of good. I mean, there's a lot of bad, a lot of negativity that I just put out there on the table, and you know, there's still this fear of being judged, of being looked down upon, and the thing is that what I've learned is that not everyone is ready to accept this message, and some people have honestly been quite harsh about it. But I also think that those are the people that need the most help. Those are
For
the
sure.
people that are in most denial about their own issues. And so instead of getting angry or even judging them, I have compassion for them. And I truly hope that they get the help they need because most often than not, when someone appears to be angry or an asshole or abrasive, it's not really because they're a bad person or because they're that way naturally. It's because that's their defense mechanism, like it was for me for many years. And they're pushing off what they don't want to acknowledge, what they don't want to admit.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Absolutely. I love it, man. I appreciate you taking time to come on and share the story behind the story of your book and just your personal journey. And I want to just make sure you understand you're valued, my friend, and you are making a difference, not just to law enforcement in the world, but to anybody that stumbles across you and your message on their well-being.
Likewise, brother. And it takes teamwork in this fight. So I applaud you for what you're doing because we all need to step out and help each other out and work as a team on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, where can our audience connect with you? Where would you like us to send them so that they can get into the book and connect with you further?
So the book is only available on Amazon, and it's Relentless Courage: Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. It's available on Kindle, paperback, hardcover. But as far as getting a hold of me, I'm literally on every social media platform. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Parlor, Truth. I mean, you name it, I'm on every single platform. And all you have to do is type in Sergeant Michael Sugrue, and you will find me, and just hit that send button, and I will definitely get back to you.
Awesome. Mike, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the good fight, my friend.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
And remember, team, life is far too short to live any other way than on purpose. We will see you all again next week.